Gregg Popovich, the man who led the San Antonio Spurs to 5 championships. Did you know he's one of only 5 coaches in NBA history to have won that many championships? What's equally impressive is the fact that he currently stands as the NBA coach with the most wins in history, having won 1,388 games in his career as of September 9th, 2024. He's even led the Spurs to a winning record of their own, surpassing Phil Jackson for the most consecutive winning seasons in NBA history. You must be wondering where I'm going with all this. My point is, if the man has achieved all this as a coach in the NBA, then he must be doing something right, don't you think? So, what's Pop's secret to success? I'll tell you. The system Gregg Popovich has employed over the years is none.
Assume we all know that stuff. There's no magic. I don't have any secret plays. And if I had one, then 400 people would have the same plays.
Yep, none at all. Okay, clearly he has to have a system of some sort. But you see, unlike a lot of coaches who run the same schemes every year, Pop is a pretty simple guy. Phil Jackson, for instance, was famous for the triangle offense during his career, and Tom Thibodeau is the master of the strong side box defense. But with Popovich, no particular tactical system really comes to mind. In a league filled with rich and influential superstar players, Popovich has consistently succeeded by a very basic method, focusing on building strong, trusting relationships and maintaining a culture of accountability and high standards. And that's pretty much the long and short of it, so I'll wrap up the video here. Oh, you're curious to know more? Well, in that case, here's how Pop does his thing. Rather than fitting his players into a system, he designs a system around his players. Now, obviously, the way the Spurs play now isn't how they played when Popovich started coaching them all those years ago. But his approach has remained consistent with a few things. With players, Popovich is very good at developing them and choosing the best strategies that suit them. So it becomes more about what the player wants than what the coach wants. And that's been his philosophy all through his 30 years with the Spurs. As cliche as it may sound, the man values relationships with his team over pretty much everything else. He understands that players are first people before athletes. He has said it himself before, too.
When's the last time you had a new pick and roll play? It's all the same damn stuff. Jerry Sloan ran the same play 77 times in a row, and nobody could beat Carl and John. So that's all baloney. It's about relationships.
About relationships with your players. How do you get something out of somebody who's selfish or doesn't really compete the way you would like, or so on and so forth.
And he demonstrates this by taking a genuine interest in their lives, beyond just what they do on the court, that is. This sense of care fosters trust and strengthens relationships, which only naturally enhances the team's cohesion and performance. Several players have mentioned how Popovich's emotional intelligence and empathy helped create a deep bond with the coach.
I've been fortunate to get hooked up with this guy who is the most selfless individual I've ever been around. All he really cares about is being a good guy, living his life, doing the right thing. It kind of leaks over into basketball, which was his job for so long.
DeMar DeRozan recounted one time when Pop showed up at his home the day after he had lost his father. Pop sat in the room and cried with me for 2 hours, he said. He told me, "I'm not leaving until you leave." An incredible gesture of true friendship. That's like your boss at work coming over to sit and mourn with you after a bereavement. Crazy, huh? Hard enough to see friends willing to do that these days. But moments like these are what truly show that Popovich values his players as individuals. He does this stuff to build strong, lasting connections that go beyond basketball. But it's not just his empathy. His integrity is another thing that makes Pop one of the realest guys in the sport. He holds that building trust with players is as important as anything else. And it starts with telling the truth and following through on it. Popovich believes in what he calls brutal, between-the-eyes honesty. He never tries to trick or manipulate a player by saying one thing and just going ahead to do something else. And as it turns out, his approach actually works. It fosters respect and trust, as players always know where they stand and what is expected of them. I never try to trick a player or manipulate them. Tell them something that I'm going to have to change next week. But you better not think, because he's such a great guy, that he's a total Mother Teresa type of person. Matter of fact, watch this clip so you get the idea.
He wanted to stop, get the possession, and then run the play.
In case you weren't able to make that out, Pop just screamed the words STFU at Danny Green. Yep, he's kind of a big swearer.
Okay, I curse.
But he was outraged for good reason. Just before the whistle, you can see him calling out to Green to avoid a foul. And with 14 seconds left on the clock, Green had put his team in a precarious situation by committing the foul anyway. So yeah, how couldn't he be upset? But he also has the same standards for everyone, no matter who it is. He holds all his players to the same level of accountability, regardless of their stature or talent. Doesn't matter if you're a superstar like Wembanyama or Jeremy Sochin. If you make a mistake or don't execute as expected, you're going to hear about it from Pop. Former player Richard Jefferson said, Pop didn't care if you averaged 20 points a game. If you went under a screen that you weren't supposed to, he was calling a timeout, cussing you out, and probably sitting you down. Tough love, yeah. But this is the kind of consistency that ensures everyone is held accountable and knows what is expected, which ultimately leads to a strong team dynamic where all players are treated fairly. And so far, this method of his has worked well, hasn't it? What's even more amazing about the Spurs is that they've had so much success in spite of the lack of what most people perceive as talent. But for a team without it, they have an awful lot of it, if you know what I mean. Under Popovich's leadership, the San Antonio Spurs have excelled at developing talent rather than relying on big free agent signings or lottery picks. Since drafting Tim Duncan in 1997, the Spurs have won 4 championships with mostly homegrown players. They had no major free agent signings or lottery draft picks since Duncan was drafted. Tiago Splitter, Danny Green, Boris Diaw, Manu Ginobili, Marco Bellinelli, and Patty Mills. This is a group of players that Popovich clearly developed into something more than they were before they joined the Spurs. If a coach has a few players who end up being more than they thought they'd be, it's good fortune. But when it's virtually every player you coach, it really can only be as a result of good coaching. It also helps that leadership from the owner, Peter Holt, down to the stars, all buy into the philosophy. Obviously, his system is what matters the most to everyone. So they let him call all the shots. Manu Ginobili admitted it. If Pop is really mad, then you drop the discussion. We might talk for 10 minutes about how to defend the pick and roll, and he may change his idea. But once he is convinced that is the way, then that is the way. And if you don't follow, you end up in the Pop doghouse. So all the players on the team buy into the system, in part because they're required to and don't want to be sidelined, but also because it works. And together, this team of lottery leftovers has had incredible success. But each individual has also enjoyed a greater career for having bought into the Pop's philosophy. But admittedly, it's not accurate to say all his players were satisfied with how he ran things. The most famous case perhaps being former Spurs star Kawhi Leonard. His main problem with Pop had to do with something yet to be mentioned about the coach. Popovich likes to add a somewhat classroom approach to his coaching. For instance, DeMar DeRozan spoke about a time Pop once made the team watch a National Geographic documentary about penguins instead of a game film. But while some players didn't mind, a guy like Kawhi just wanted to play ball and couldn't care less if penguins had torpedo-shaped bodies for effective swimming. Jock Landale was once required to prepare a 2-minute presentation on Joe Biden, so this was probably the kind of stuff Kawhi had to put up with himself. According to Steven Jackson, who was with the Spurs during the 2012-13 season, Kawhi opposed head coach Gregg Popovich's teachings. He's trying to make you a better person, but he's going to put you in a lot of situations to test you. He did it to me, he did it to Kawhi, he did it to a lot of other people. But Kawhi couldn't take that, said Jackson on the All the Smoke podcast. Kawhi Leonard eventually left the San Antonio Spurs in a controversial 2018 move to join the Toronto Raptors with a year left in his contract. But even if they weren't the best of friends during his time at Spurs, Pop still came to his defense when Kawhi played against his former team in 2023. Now with the LA Clippers, Kawhi had returned to the Frostbank Center to play against the Spurs, a game the home side lost 109-102, marking their 10th straight defeat. And fans were infuriated by the contribution of their former All-Star to this defeat. And so, they booed Kawhi repeatedly during the game. Late in the first half of the game, Pop took the mic and told the crowd off, calling them hateful and mean-spirited.
These guys playing, it's got no class, it's not who we are. Knock off the booing.
Pop telling the fans to lay off Kawhi Leonard, but that's not San Antonio.
This just shows how much he truly cares for his players, past and present. But there have been some players that were as fond of Pop as he was of them, like his longtime Spurs point guard, Tony Parker. While their partnership almost never got off the ground, they later turned out to be very good friends. Believe it or not, Popovich initially disliked Parker. He saw him as an unaggressive weenie who didn't like contact, and he was just 19 years old. Pop wanted to get rid of him immediately, but agreed to give him another shot after a plea from Parker's agent. The second time around, Pop was impressed by the youngster, and the rest is history. The two men went on to spend 17 years together. Only in Parker's final season did he play with another team, the Charlotte Hornets. Pop played no small part in Parker's illustrious career, a 4-time champion, Finals MVP, and a 6-time All-Star. But even Parker admitted Pop was so tough on him that it almost bordered on abuse. During my rookie season, I sometimes had tears in my eyes in the shower after practice. I told myself, I'll never be able to satisfy this coach. He'll never be happy. All he did was push me to test my limits, but there were never limits. And all that paid off. The pair today is the first coach-player duo to be inducted into the same Hall of Fame class in NBA history. Of course, the relationship Popovich shared with Tim Duncan was great too, and probably can't be matched. But if there is anything that comes close, it's Popovich-Parker. While Pop may have an eccentric method of doing his job, the numbers still don't lie. 5 NBA championships and the most wins in NBA history, his method worked. He puts his relationship with the players first, but at the same time is as tough as can be when the situation calls for it. Just ask Tony Parker, and while clearly not all his players bought into his philosophy, those who did enjoyed the fruit of their partnership. A philosophy of being the nicest, most real coach in the world, but also being a very thorough individual. But what are your own thoughts about it? Let us know in the comments below. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe to keep seeing more of our content. Hasta luego.